Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar or sustainability webinar for February 2026. Now, in this month's webinar, we're looking at a very important topic, and that is making the case why sustainability should matter to CEOs and boards. We scheduled these topics towards the end of last year. And little did I know that the hottest topic in the month of February would be what questions boards should be asking finance teams and sustainability experts when they review and when they look at draft mandatory sustainability reports. So for some reason, we got the topic right. So today it's all about the boards, all about CEOs, and their expectations around sustainability and sustainability reporting. Now, today I'm joined by Claudia Wazorski, who's a senior manager in our sustainability reporting team here in Melbourne. Now, Claudia is incredibly experienced. She's helped many of our Group 1 clients getting ready for AASB S2. And currently, Claudia, we are presenting to many boards. We are dealing with many auditor queries. So we're really in the thick of things. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Alida.
Now, BDO acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. And we pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. As you know, we've got our monthly sustainability webinars. It's already the second one for 2026. And from March onwards, we're going to pivot back to our favorite sustainability disclosure standard, AASB S2 Climate-related Disclosures. And we're really focusing on helping our clients, whether they are Group 1, Group 2, or Group 3, get ready. And we're going back in March to the climate science underpinning the standard. Then we look at governance. In May, very important, we look at lessons that we've learned from year 1, 31 December 2025 reporters. We look at climate risk assessments and so forth. So that's the schedule for the year. Remember, if you attend these sessions, you can get a CPD certificate. So you should receive it afterwards. If you miss a session or if you have to leave early, we do make the recordings available on our BDO Australia website. We also make the PowerPoints available on the BDO website, or a PDF of the presentation. So all the material is there for you. And you can actually look at recordings of what we've done over the last 5 years. We also do IFRS and corporate reporting webinars. These days, my fellow partner, Dean Arden, are running with those. I know last week he looked at business activities and IFRS 18 and why they are central to implementation. So this year he'll really focus on the new IFRS accounting standards, standard IFRS 18. I will join him on occasion during the year to talk about all things sustainability. But really, Dean is running with that one. I also wanted to flag that BDO is incredibly proud to be a sponsor and a partner with the AFR on sustainability leaders. And we will be presenting, we will be the presenting and methodology partner for 2026 and 2027. And the idea is to recognize organizations delivering measurable sustainability impact. So if you are interested and you want to find out more about the program, there's a link on the right-hand side. And, please consider whether your organization could be a strong entrant. I would also like to announce that Quitch, BDO and CPA Australia have partnered, and we are, BDO has recorded videos which are made available via the Quitch app on your mobile phone. And it's being promoted to CPA members as well. So it's tripartite partnership. So if you're looking for sustainability essentials for financial leaders or professionals, at the moment we've got 5 videos that I've recorded. They between 10 and 15 minutes each. You watch on your phone, you answer a few questions afterwards generated by AI, and then you get a CPD certificate. Now, the reason we've done this is we thought there's a need for board members and senior executives to get their head around the basics of sustainability, and in particular mandatory sustainability reporting, without sitting through lengthy webinars or courses. So these are really aimed to be short and sharp, nano learning on the go. So if you want to promote something like that to directors or people in your business, I think that's a good idea, and you can contact me for more information. Now, we've recently, earlier in February, had another carbon accounting masterclass. Thank you very much for everybody that's attended. The next one is on the 13th of May, 2026. So you can start registering for those. We've moved them now to the second week of the month, so that people can first finish their monthly reporting and then have time to come to the Carbon Accounting Masterclass. It is 9 o'clock to 5 p.m. Melbourne time, and you can register for those. I should also say that Claudia and I will both be in Sydney next week, and on Tuesday we are running master classes before the start of the Sustainability Reporting Summit in Sydney. So the summit is from Wednesday to Friday, but on the Tuesday, the day before, Claudia and Natalia, another senior manager in our team, are running a masterclass across carbon accounting. And I'll be running an advanced sustainability reporting masterclass. So we do hope to see some of you there. And then if you've attended the Carbon Accounting Masterclasses, we invite you to attend our Carbon Accounting Masterclass alumni events. The next one is on the 11th of May. And we've started this because we want to make sure that those people who've been part of our Carbon Accounting Masterclass cohort receive all the latest and greatest information. And therefore, we continue to invite you to the alumni events. So please put that in your calendar too. Another shout out, we've got our AASB S2 disclosure checklist. Many people have potentially drafted their first mandatory sustainability report, and now they're thinking, did I deal with everything? Are there still gaps? And a good checklist to use, 150 disclosures. And also, if you are at the start of the journey and you're thinking, what is this going to look like at the end of the journey? What is it going to look like? We've got our illustrative sustainability report that you can download. Now, for today's session, we've divided the webinar into 3 parts. In part A, we want to look at an introduction to the role of the board and the CEO. So in general, what's the role of the board and the CEO? Then in part B, we want to look at the role of this board and the CEO around mandatory sustainability reporting, which we know is a key focus at the moment. And we're doing a lot of board presentations. A lot of board members are trying to wrap their head around what's been put in front of them. They have to sign a director's declaration. So what are the questions they should be asking? And then in part C, we look at the role of the board and the CEO across broad sustainability, because sustainability is not just about climate, and it's not just about mandatory sustainability reporting. There's a whole big world around sustainability that we want to explore, and we believe the board and the CEO should be interested in. So that's the 3 parts: general sustainability, mandatory sustainability, and then broad sustainability, 3 parts. So in part A, we thought we'll start with the role of the board. Now, the board of directors oversee purpose, strategy, and risk to help create long-term value for stakeholders. So important, if you look at that very first bullet point, we see the word strategy, and we know we have to do strategy disclosures as part of AASB S2 Climate-related strategy. We see the word risk, and again, we know we have to deal with risk management as part of AASB S2. So the board are looking at purpose, strategy, risk. Why? Because they want to create long-term value for stakeholders. And that strategy and risk also covers climate-related strategy and risk. Emerging issues, material risks, increasing regulations, and stakeholder demands all compete as priorities on the board's agenda. The board would say, we want to consider emerging issues. So boards would consider AI as an emerging issue. The board would consider sustainability, climate-related disclosures as an emerging issue. But more importantly, the board will focus on material risks to the business and the value proposition for the business. There's increasing regulations, and we know there's AASB S2, and we know there's stakeholder demands. We are seeing, as Group 1 entities are starting to report, they have demands of their suppliers, of entities in their value chain around sustainability. And then the third point there is that transparent communications and strong oversight are more important than ever to instill stakeholder confidence in a company's long-term sustainability. Transparent communications in our annual report, strong oversight by the board over those communications. So I've included there a link at the top, which is to the BDO Center for Corporate Governance, and where you can read a little bit more about board responsibilities. But on the right-hand side, Amy is a partner in our BDO US firm, and she heads up the Center for Corporate Governance. She runs podcasts and all kind of amazing stuff. She's a governance rock star. And this is one of her quotes. Board leadership is more than the presence of a unique skill, perspective, or diversity of thought that will meet the organization's needs and close its gaps. Board members represent the company at its highest level, and they should continually and proactively assess risk tolerance and set clear expectations for management's execution of strategy and reporting on relevant key performance indicators. And if I've got AASB S2 at the back of my mind, the board members represent the company at its highest level. They are overall responsible for AASB S2. They should continually, proactively assess risk tolerance around climate and sustainability and set expectations of what management should be doing. So this is very high level, the role of the board. And that's where the buck stops with them. If you look at directors' duties, there's a wonderful publication by the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and I've got the link in there, where they talk about general duties of directors. And this is even before considering sustainability reporting. So if I look at this little diagram from that publication, they've said they should not improperly use information or their position. They should avoid conflicts of interest. They should prevent insolvent trading. And they've got statutory duties in relation to financial record keeping and reporting. And that has now been extended also to record keeping around sustainability reporting. They've got statutory duties in the areas of financial services, consumer law, the environment and workplace health and safety law. And many of those things are captured in broad sustainability. Very important, directors have to act with reasonable care and diligence. And again, I can't help but bring the connection to sustainability. We know that the directors for the first 3 years have to sign off a director's declaration to say that the entity has taken all reasonable steps to comply with the sustainability disclosure standards. So reasonable care and diligence. And then also directors have to act in good faith in the best interest of the company and for a proper purpose. So these are general directors' duties as discussed in this AICD document. So that's very high level role of the board, directors or board duties. Now, what about the CEO? What's the role of the CEO? So sometimes the CEO is the director on the board, sometimes not. What's really important is the second point is that the CEO is the head of the executive team and manages the day-to-day operations of the organization, its people and resources. So the CEO implements the strategy approved by the board. It ensures that the organization's structure and processes meet the strategic and cultural needs of the organization. And the CEO is expected to provide management oversight and provide strong and clear leadership. So generally, a CEO is authorized and responsible for the management of the organization and its operations by way of a delegated authority from the board, or sometimes it's expressed in the organization's constitution. So again, from that document, this delegation of authority generally includes responsibility for the following. Now, I've specifically put this in here because I want to make it really clear that if you look at the general roles and responsibility of a CEO, there's absolutely no way the CEO is not responsible for sustainability and sustainability reporting. So listen to this. If you look at the first one, managing the organization's financial and other reporting mechanisms, the control and monitoring systems to ensure that these mechanisms and systems all capture relevant material information on a timely basis, functionally, effectively, and founded on a sound basis of prudential risk management. So first of all, I want to apologize. I've been talking and I thought everybody's been seeing my slides, but apparently you're not. We've got some serious IT issues today, but let's keep going. On the second bullet point, the CEO has to ensure that the board is provided with sufficient accurate information on a timely basis in regard to the organization, its operations, business and affairs, and in particular with respect to the organization's corporate performance, financial conditions, operations and prospects, so as to reasonably position the board to fulfill its governance responsibilities. So the CEO has to assist the board to fulfill those governance responsibilities, and we know there's a lot of governance responsibilities within AASB S2, and you have to disclose those. The CEO in the third bullet point also has to develop business plans, budgets, and strategies for consideration by the board, and to the extent approved by the board, implementing these plans, budgets, and strategies. Ensure the organizations are within the parameters set, look at the proposed transactions, commitments, or arrangements. And then the second last bullet point, identify and management and managing operational and corporate risk for the organization. And then finally, implementing policies, processes, and codes of conduct approved by the board. So you can see that all of these things in some way captures what we've been talking about around AASB S2 and the responsibilities under AASB S2. So the most important role of the board is to appoint and work effectively with the CEO. And in practice, these two are really dependent on one another. And that's also true for sustainability reporting. So boards rely on CEOs to provide input into strategic development, to implement strategy, communicate the management's perspective, and alert the board to material issues that are relevant and material to the organization. And the CEO relies on the board for delegation of authority for clear direction, mentoring, and support. So I think it's when we designed this session, we wanted to focus on, now with the pointy end of mandatory sustainability reporting, how CEOs and boards have to work together to get to that final product, and that they really rely on each other. So that is part A, where we gave an overall introduction into role of a board and the CEO and how they work together. If we bring it back to part B, and we ask why mandatory sustainability reporting should matter to CEOs and boards, we know that in the new annual report, we'll have an annual financial report, the director's report, an auditor's report, and an annual sustainability report. So the annual sustainability report is going to investors and financiers and users together with financial information. So the importance of this sustainability report has been elevated. This is going in the public domain. It's going to be subject to assurance. So clearly, boards are saying, we've got a lot of processes around the financial report. We put in a lot of effort to approve a financial report. We want to do a similar process, a similar focus on this annual sustainability report, because our investors are no longer just looking at the financial report, they're looking at these two reports side by side. So that's important. If you look at AASB S2, you'll see some very familiar terms on this slide. And this is an overview of the composition of AASB S2. So it's about governance. And definitely that's what the board and the CEO should be worried about. What's our governance around sustainability reporting, and how does it fit into governance across the whole business? What is our strategy around climate-related disclosures? So how have we identified these risks and opportunities? What's our climate resilience? What impact does it have on our strategy, broader strategy, our business model? What are the effects of all of this on our financial statements? And if you look at risk management, we know the board is responsible for risk. We know the CEO has to report to board on significant or material risk items. So what are these processes again around risk management, around scenario analysis, and how is it integrated into the overall risk management process and risk register? So sustainability are not sitting in isolation. How do we bring all of this together in an enterprise-wide risk register, risk management framework? And then finally, if you look at metrics and targets, what is our carbon footprint? How have we set targets? How have we set it? Do we want to stick to those targets? How are we progressing against those targets? Will we need to use carbon credits to get to our targets, etc.? So keywords here: governance, strategy, risk, targets, all the words that boards care about and CEOs care about. Now, I've talked about this roadmap so many times, and I'm just putting it here very briefly because it's a starting point for where I want to go next. I want to articulate why I believe there's an expectation gap, and that directors are quite exposed if they don't understand the expectation gap. And once they understand the expectation gap, the question is, how do they respond? So I thought I'll put this roadmap here as an example. So this is a Group 1 roadmap for an entity with a 30 June year end. And previously we've talked about, there's a lot of topics on the left-hand side that are included within AASB S2. And then for every year, I've distinguished between when do we report it, when do we have to mandatory report on that topic, and that is phased in. So in the first year, you don't have to do scope 3. and you don't have to do comparatives. But in the second year, you also have to do scope 3 as well as comparatives for all other aspects. So there's a phasing around sustainability reporting. There's also a phasing around limited assurance over the 3 years, and finally in the 4th year we get to reasonable assurance and normal audit. So in that first year there's only limited assurance over 3 aspects, and then in the 2nd and 3rd year there's limited assurance over absolutely everything, and finally around reasonable assurance. So there's phasing of reporting, there's phasing of limited assurance. In addition to that, there's phasing of the responsibilities, there's phasing around the liability settings for directors around mandatory sustainability reporting. So first of all, directors have to understand that their duties in the Corporations Act has been amended, and they now also have the duty and the responsibility to prepare a mandatory sustainability report. And their directors' duties include care and diligence to consider material climate risk. They still have duties and obligations around misleading and deceptive conduct. They still have general disclosure obligations, maintenance of documents and information provided to others, and contraventions of the provisions can attract a maximum civil penalty for an individual of 1.5 million. So what you can see here is that whatever obligations they had for financial reports and financial statements are now extended to also cover that mandatory sustainability report. Now, I've mentioned phasing. The director's declaration is being phased in. So for the first 3 years, so from 1 January to 1 January 2025 to 1 January 2028, the directors have to sign a separate director's declaration as to whether the entity has taken reasonable steps to ensure that the contents of this mandatory sustainability report are in accordance with the Corporations Act and also AASB S2. So there's a phasing, reasonable steps. And only after that period, the director's declaration will have to say that the sustainability report actually complies with the sustainability standards. So that's the director's declaration. I think a critical aspect is for directors to understand their liability. So there are modified liability settings where no legal action may be brought in relation to certain types of statements, and they call them protected statements, that are made within the sustainability report or the accompanying audit report. So the modified liability settings do not apply to action taken by ASIC. So from day one, ASIC can take action. However, when it comes to liability of directors, there are 3 protected statements. There's the scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, that's protected, scenario analysis, and transition plan. But it's only for reports prepared for financial years commencing between 1 January 2025 and 31 December 2027. And then also it includes forward-looking statements under the continuous disclosure regime for financial statements prepared or statements prepared during that period. So there's a phasing. Now it's interesting to note, and this is not said here, but interesting to note, if we've got protected statements for 3 years, it also means that all other statements in the mandatory sustainability report doesn't have modified liability, and therefore directors have full personal liability for all those other statements. And that gave me the idea that there's an expectation gap. And this is what I've tried to illustrate on this slide. So I've used that roadmap that I've shown a few slides ago for Group 1 entities with 30 June year ends, and I've just cut out a piece of it. I've looked at the 30 June 2026 year end, And I've said, let's add an additional column. We have the normal reporting, which is not scope 3 in the first year. We have limited assurance, which is only covering 3 sections. And then I thought, let's look at directors' liabilities. So do directors have liability for these statements in 30 June 2026 year end? And I can see for governance, they've got liability for strategy, they've got liability for risk management, for scope 1 and 2 emissions, and for climate-related metrics and targets. The only thing where they've got modified liability due to the protected statement is the climate resilience scenario analysis, transition plans, and scope 3. And scope 3 is not even reported in that particular year. So what is the expectation gap? If we look at them, if you look at governance, we're going to report it. There will be limited assurance, and the directors have liability. So I don't see a gap. If you look at the strategy and you look at those 3 sub-paragraphs that the auditors also form a conclusion on, directors are liable, there's no gap. However, when you go at the 3rd row, where we look at strategy, which includes risks and opportunities, business model, value chain, strategy and decision-making, financial position, financial performance and cash flows, for all of those aspects. So that's all the disclosures under paragraph 10C to paragraph 21. I mean, that is the majority of the mandatory sustainability report, to be honest. All of those paragraphs have to be reported. There will be no limited assurance over it, but the directors have unlimited liability. So I see a gap there. And you can see, obviously, with climate resilience, transition plans, there's no gap because at least directors have a protection. It will be disclosed, but they're protected. The other one where there's a gap is with risk management. And there's also a gap with climate-related metrics and targets. So I thought I wanted to flag with board members today, but also to executives and finance teams. Are your directors aware of the fact that all of this information will be disclosed? Not all of it will be subject to limited assurance, and not all of it will be covered through modified liability through protected statements. So there's this gap where directors have to be super careful of what they sign off on. So really that's the purpose of this slide. I think it's also important that ASIC has pushed out their regulatory guide 280 in March, and they've specifically said that directors should have an understanding about their entity's sustainability reporting obligations. They should have an understanding of climate-related risks or opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects. And those prospects include access to cash flow, access to finance, and cost of capital over short, medium, and long term. And they will have to require, or they will be required to establish or oversee the establishment of systems that identify, assess, and monitor any material financial risk and opportunities relating to climate, including any changes. So RG28 makes that very clear. They also said directors should require the establishment of controls, policies, procedures that would oversee, manage, prepare the sustainability report. And they mentioned it could include identifying relevant business units and employees that's responsible for key inputs. It may also include identifying how climate-related financial information is obtained, it's used to inform the disclosures, and require them to establish controls, policies, and procedures. So all the things that the directors have previously developed and oversaw for management to develop around financial reports, they now also have to do that for mandatory sustainability reporting. And directors should apply a critical lens to the disclosures proposed in the sustainability report. So, for example, ASIC is saying, questioning the appropriateness or completeness of methodologies. Critically consider the inputs and the assumptions to support the disclosures. Critically assess the extent that there may be any material omissions, having regard to their knowledge of the business. Critical again, perspective over whether the disclosures have been properly characterized and whether additional information should be disclosed. So a big focus on directors to look at these disclosures and ask some questions. RG28 specifically says directors can rely on experts. So in carrying out these responsibilities, directors may rely on the special knowledge or expertise of others in relation to sustainability reporting. So it could be experts, advisors, and other suitably qualified people. And those people could be internal to the business or external. So they don't have to be experts on everything, the directors, but they can rely on other people. Now, the most important part is actually the last sentence on this slide, or the last bullet point. The fact that directors can rely on experts does not absolve the directors from making an independent assessment of the information or advice provided. They must still use their own skills and judgment when they look at these disclosures. Now, again, I want to come back. That's a big statement. Let's come back to an example of a roadmap that we've developed over the years. So, for example, for a Group 1 entity, we would have said for mandatory sustainability reporting, we had our 2 project streams, one on carbon, one on AASB S2. For each of the streams, we have 5 projects that altogether we have 10 projects. So these are the projects that in our view, businesses should conduct to be ready for mandatory sustainability reporting. And now the question is, bringing it back to the directors, how do the directors ensure that all of these projects ran successfully? How do they get their heads around the deliverables from these projects to assess whether they can rely on them for the disclosures? So there's 10 significant projects running in the business in order to get ready for mandatory sustainability reporting. Directors should consider those projects. So 1, did we run the project as a business? Did we run it successfully? What does the outcomes look like? Do we agree with those outcomes? So in practice, what Claudia and I have seen is often we run these 2 project streams, each having 5 projects at the same time. We just don't have the luxury of doing the one and then the other. So if you look at project stream 1, we look at that boundary setting policies, the basis of PREP, the measurement of scope 1 and 2, scope 3 next year, and we do target setting, whilst at the same time we're looking at governance, risk assessment, scenario analysis, modeling, and finally preparing the report. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time in the business. Now, previously, and in particular in our December webinar last year, we talked about auditor expectations regarding mandatory sustainability reporting. So I went back to that December webinar and I picked up a few screenshots of the things we talked about. So we talked about, are the responsibilities of the board and management clearly defined? Do we have the governance in place? Do we have all the data? On climate risk and opportunities, we said not documented, not done. You know, these are the things that at a management level we should do, and auditors will ask for it. On the right-hand side, I've got some audit expectations on carbon accounting. I have some discussion around what about the other information in this report. So these are just snapshots from that December webinar. Now, we know what management should be doing all these projects. We know what the auditors are looking at. What about the board? You know, so under the Corps Act and AASB S2, boards are required to oversee all of this. And high-performing boards are expected to set the tone from the top, embed sustainability into their culture, monitor and oversee these risks, especially around climate. They have to hold management accountable. And very important, if they have to do all these things, they need a grasp of climate literacy. They need a grasp on climate literacy, which often is a bit of a shortcoming. So directors and CEOs must now understand AASB S2 scope and obligations at a board level. They have to be able to recognize data and assurance requirements to make sure that all stuff being put in front of them are actually audit ready. And they have to put their skills together through targeted information and engaging external expertise. So some of the practical challenges we are seeing is that boards often face skills gap in climate and ESG. So it's important to either recruit board members that have those skills or upskill existing board members. We have to make sure that they consider how sustainability has impacted financial forecasts, risk registers, capital planning, disclosures. And very important, how do we get that cross-functional collaboration? And there could be new processes that's required. So if you look at these sustainability governance, it's really important that we look at structure our ESG governance with defined accountabilities. Let's look at education. Let's integrate sustainability into KPIs, and let's have some scrutiny. You know, there will be scrutiny from employees and customers as well. So really important that there's clear accountability between the board and executive, that the scenario analysis is co-owned, that there are regular risk updates to the board, included in board packs, and that board discussions move from compliance to opportunity recognition. I want to hand over now for the next few slides to Claudia, because I've asked Claudia to think critically. All the things that we are currently doing with management to help a business getting ready or assurance ready and to prepare that draft sustainability report. And we're doing a huge work across all those projects. What do Claudia and I think boards should do management regarding mandatory sustainability reporting, specifically knowing that there's a lot of things that the director have to sign off on that the auditor will not express a conclusion on. So there's that gap. So how do directors fill the gap? So Claudia, over to you.
Thanks, Alida. I think that introduction that you've provided to go back to what is the role of the board is really critical, because it really sets that expectation. And I think that as managers, group financial controllers, everyone on this webinar, a recommendation that we have is to take that slide that demonstrates what the gap is and to make sure that that is communicated internally, because that's going to be critical to making sure that the board becomes and remains engaged in this process over time. So in terms of what that next step is, what should that board then come to management with? What are the questions that they should be asking? It does come down to the fact that they aren't expected, no director is now expected to become a climate scientist, but they are expected to apply their skill set that was identified as part of the succession planning and selection of getting them onto the board in the first place, using that skill set and expertise that they've developed over time to interrogate the results that management produce for them to ultimately collate into this sustainability report. And so these questions are listed here on this in the next slide as potentially what you can ask during the execution of this process yourself, but what you should expect your board of directors to be asking you when they interrogate the work that's been performed. So from a governance perspective, starting with the first pillar of reporting, how have your governance processes been affected or updated to make sure that sustainability considerations are embedded in your governance processes? So not just your decision making, but your oversight thereof as well, not just at the executive level, but feeding up all the way to the board of directors. So if there are documented processes, have the appropriate updates been included in these, and how often are these matters being communicated within the business? So not just within management groups, but also up to the board itself, whether that's the monthly board meeting, perhaps there's a quarterly agenda item, and if the board only meets half yearly, perhaps it is appropriate to make sure that it's tabled every single time. So ultimately, who is responsible? And if that's the board, making sure that that communication is really robust and occurs regularly. So establishing these modes of or ways of working is really, really important to manage expectations and to make sure that the board feels supported to sign off on these disclosures. Ultimately, it is really important to be asking the questions, how often will the board be updated on climate-related issues? And then when you move on from the governance to the strategy as well as the metrics and targets sections of the report, that's when you start thinking about the implication of sustainability and climate-specific matters on the business. So how and to what extent has management defined the business model? Have we captured all of our operations? Is there concentration in some of these operations that needs to be explored more than others? And then once we've explored the business model, how and to what extent has management defined the value chain? So this is where things can get a little bit more tricky. We might need to do a little bit more estimation or consider reasonable assumptions when determining what disclosures might need to look like. But the value chain and the extent of the value chain is really important to determining what climate risk really looks like and what climate opportunities also look like for your business. So when you're going through that, what was the actual process that management followed? How robust was that? What were the sources? How credible are those sources? What are the reasonable assumptions that were applied? Do we think they're reasonable? All of these questions that internally you're probably being asked by your CFO on a monthly basis when you're submitting your monthly management packs, but these are also questions at the board level that we should expect your directors to be asking, especially in the first year of reporting, when a lot of this information is going to be presented to the market for the very first time. So having robust processes in place and then making sure that we have a really good process in place for selecting the disclosures themselves, understanding what's gone into that process is going to be really important to making sure that the directors have comfort around what's ultimately disclosed. So which of the risks and opportunities that management has identified are actually going to be disclosed and why? That critical question is really why. How have we come to that conclusion and what are the considerations that we've input into that decision-making process? Because even though it is drafting reporting disclosures, there are a series of critical decisions that need to be made, and the leaders in our business need to be able to defend those decisions to the board of directors ultimately. So once we've done our climate risk and opportunity assessment, there is still the question of climate scenario analysis so that we can test our business resilience. So what process and methodology is being followed to conduct that scenario analysis? When we're preparing our scenario narratives, what is the narrative that was developed for both a low and high warming scenario and why? What are the high impact, high uncertainty drivers that we're using and why? Again, the theme is why? Because we need to make sure that the position that we've come to is defendable and that the directors ultimately have comfort So what lessons can we learn from the scenario analysis? And this links into the strategic role of the board, in that if we've uncovered something that is forward-looking and that can impact the business's future, it's in the board's interest to know exactly what that is, so that they can consider the appropriate way of planning for that and what the appetite is of the business to either manage the risk or to address the strategic outcomes that could flow from that opportunity. So it's not just linked to a compliance questioning. There is a strategic aspect to what the board can learn from this process as well. So making sure that the board is clued into that aspect of it as well. So linking to the next question, should we change our strategy in response to the outcomes that we've learnt? And sometimes there may be an appetite to do that. Sometimes we don't have enough data, or there isn't enough certainty around the outcomes to be able to make a decision. But by identifying that today and by applying continuous improvement principles, the board can stay informed over time. And that's exactly what we're looking to achieve here. So then when we talk about financial outcomes, how did management go about quantifying? And to build on that, if we haven't quantified things, why not? So what are the impacts on the business? What do we anticipate the impacts to be? What are the metrics that are used, and do they align with the key metrics that we're currently using to evaluate business performance? If there is a misalignment there, that's really critical information for the board to consider around how the strategy and effectiveness of the strategy is measured moving forward, and how that might need to change to stay relevant. So moving on from the strategic pillar of reporting, which is where there's a lot of meat, but in the greenhouse gas emissions calculation and measurement, there are a lot of data and inputs that may need to be estimated or assumed. So when we present a carbon footprint to the board of directors, it is appropriate for them to interrogate, how did we come to the position that we've come to? And the fourth question down is critical. What is management's confidence level on the GHG emissions that have been presented, and why? What kind of evaluation has gone into the data quality, and how do we know that it's not going to change significantly over the next reporting periods? So if we go down, how can management provide the board with sufficient confidence that the measurement undertaken is sufficiently accurate and reliable? Because eventually we want to be set up for success when we do set our targets. So what are the key sources of uncertainty? How can we continuously improve our measurement process? And moving forward, what ongoing review, so moving back to the processes, what's in place to ensure that changes in the business or in the value chain effectively trigger updates to what's going on, so that these can also be monitored and managed? So finally, what is management's recommendation on setting emissions reduction targets? So there are a lot of questions that we, in doing our work, we receive from management that we also need to be able to discuss. But from a client's perspective, from a compliance perspective, that is, and we expect that there will be a level of focus on the compliance perspective, especially in the first year of reporting. However, that doesn't mean that it is mutually exclusive from the strategic benefit that can arise from asking some of these questions as well. And so it's really important to make sure that there is a balanced conversation, and often when the board of directors meets, it is the combination of skills and expertise that these people have amassed over their careers that allows for that balanced conversation to happen. So the importance of these questions shouldn't be underestimated, but if you do need some support in getting the board on board, perhaps these are some slides that you can present to start that really robust conversation. Aletta, do you have anything to add?
No, Claudia, thank you very much for that. That was very comprehensive, and I value your contribution. So Claudia is working very closely with so many of our Group 1 clients, with their auditors, with executives, and now also helping executives to get ready for not only conversation with the auditors, but conversations with the board. So Claudia, thank you very much for sharing those really practical insights. Really appreciate it. I know we've run over time, so we'll wrap it up around part C, and that is why broad sustainability and ESG should matter to CEOs. So, we've just focused on sustainability reporting around climate in part B, but broadly, there's so much more to sustainability. Climate change is just one thing. There's all these other wonderful things that boards and CEOs should care about, and often already care about, because they already look at First Nation engagement, they look at health and safety, they look at customer satisfaction, look at skills matrix, so many other things. So broadly, why would boards care about this? It's not mandatory to report all of this, only mandatory to report climate. Why would boards and CEOs care? And we know, as we've often said, it's all about access to capital, debt or equity, access to markets or customers, and access to people to work in the business. Because ultimately the board wants to generate long-term value for stakeholders. And the CEO is obviously helping them with that. The 2025 BDO Outlook survey in the US came up with the top 10 benefits of broad sustainability. And every time I look at this list, I'm just amazed at all these benefits. Increased innovation, and that's what we need, especially in Australia. We need innovation, new business opportunities. We need increases in revenue. We see access to favorable financing. We see improved risk management, improved supply chain resilience, broader risk considerations, cost savings, etc. So there's so many benefits that a board and a CEO would be interested in. Last year, we also did a global survey, and one of the things, and there was also a particular focus on Asia Pac. So we've said that sustainability isn't just a checkbox anymore. With mandatory climate reporting now in play, Australian businesses are rethinking risk, strategy, and what it means to lead responsibly, to unpack all those broader sustainability benefits. So I think that's really important, that boards and CEOs just don't keep their head down on mandatory reporting, but ultimately lift up their heads and look at broad sustainability initiatives, priorities, potential benefits. It's really important that stakeholder expectations are redefining governance across broad sustainability. It's not just about regulatory shifts. We've seen investor activism, we've seen scrutiny from employees and customers. We know that we now want transparent reporting, not just on climate, on everything. We want meaningful climate disclosures and also assurance quality data. And then also, if we are falling short on any of these, there could be that we alienate our stakeholders. We've got increased regulatory investigation. We could have loss of customers. We can have missed capital opportunities. And there could be exposure to climate and other impacts. So stakeholder expectations are really redefining governance and what boards and CEOs should be looking at. It's important to align sustainability with your corporate strategy. So it's important that sustainability influence capital investments, market positioning, supply chain resilience, workforce capability. And we often hear, and there's been a number of studies that say companies with sustainability strategies are more resilient to regulatory shocks and stakeholder scrutiny. So if we look at the CEO's role in accelerating this momentum around sustainability, CEOs are expected to lead organization alignment, not delegate ESG downwards. CEOs have to lead from the top. CEOs must ensure that these ESG considerations shape capital investment, supply chain expectation, workforce capability, competitive strategy. And CEOs who drive sustainability and ESG early on reduce regulatory disruption later. I think, why is it important to act now? And this is for the board, it's for the CEO. Early movers secure investor confidence and customer loyalty. Strong ESG governance reduces compliance stress later. And mature sustainability capability drives value, not burden. So very important that we look at decisive leadership from boards and executives. Sustainability, I know we're all busy with mandatory sustainability reporting. I know, and it's important. But sustainability is now a strategic, financial, and governance priority. So boards must really shift from just high-level oversight to how do we activate, embed in the business sustainability, not just climate, across broad sustainability. And organizations that lead on sustainability will set market expectations and not chase them. And we have developed a checklist to get entities activated on this sustainability strategy. And again, Claudia and I and our team have done quite a bit of work with organizations thinking, what do you already have in place? What do your stakeholders want? Do stakeholder engagement. Work out how you fill the gaps. How do you measure what your stakeholders want to see? And how do you voluntarily report on that to keep stakeholder confidence? And how do you improve on that over time? So we want organizations to move from awareness to activation to leadership. We want to provide boards with a structure on how do you prioritize all these things you could be chasing and could be doing. And I think it also bridges that gap between mandatory reporting requirements and broader ESG strategy. Finally, how BDO can help. We look after carbon accounting. We do sustainability reporting, but we also do sustainability strategy. And finally, as you all know, we do sustainability assurance. Now, I've often talked about carbon measurement. I've talked about sustainability reporting, whether it's mandatory or voluntary. But today, we wanted to highlight some of the sustainability strategy initiatives that boards and CEOs should embrace, in addition to the wonderful work around sustainability reporting and carbon accounting. And then finally, of course, we always need assurance. If you are looking for sustainability report specialist at BDO, you can contact me or my team, Kevin or Tom or Ashley. And you can also register, obviously, for the webinars or for our monthly newsletters. Corporate Reporting Insights was published last Thursday, and Sustainability News will be published tomorrow. Finally, Claudia, I want to thank you for joining me today for this webinar. It was one of those baptism of fire webinars where technology was throwing all kinds of issues at you and me today. So thank you for staying calm and helping me through it. To our attendees, we apologize for all the IT glitches, but I hope you still got some valuable content out of the day. So thank you again to Claudia sharing her expertise. Thank you for attending, everybody, and we'll speak again next month.